Your death would be the perfect gift." The words echoed in the dining room, piercing my heart like icy daggers. A week before my 68th birthday, my son, Mark, hurled that phrase at me with a coldness I never imagined he possessed. The fork slipped from my hand, clattering onto the porcelain plate with a sound that seemed to amplify the deafening silence that followed. I was in shock, paralyzed in my oak chair, feeling the air thin in my lungs. My eyes, accustomed to seeing only love and gratitude on his face, now met a glacial disdain, an indifference that tore me apart inside. This was the boy I carried for 9 months, whom I raised alone on the bustling streets of Chicago after his father left us, who I loved unconditionally my entire life. How could he, my own son, wish for my death? If you've ever felt the pain of such a profound betrayal, or if this story resonates with you in any way, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment. I'd love to know where you're listening from, and if you also believe that some lessons need to be learned the hard way. In that moment, as Mark looked at me with a scorn I didn't recognize, a whirlwind of memories flooded my mind. I remembered the sleepless nights, rocking him when he had a fever, the 2 jobs I held, as a cashier at a local grocery store during the day and cleaning offices downtown at night, to ensure he never lacked for anything. I sacrificed so he could have the best books, the toys he wanted, and the extra math and science classes that would help him excel in the neighborhood public school. Every sacrifice, every drop of sweat, every tear shed for him seemed to turn into poison, corroding the image of a dedicated and selfless mother I always believed myself to be. The humiliation was palpable, burning my skin like acid. Mark, my only son, the reason for my existence, the heir to all my love and effort, had just wished for my death. Still stunned, but with a cold, relentless determination growing in my chest, I began to plan. It wasn't revenge in the literal sense, the kind you see in movies, but a quest for justice, for a lesson he desperately needed to learn. In the following days, I acted methodically, with a calm that surprised even myself. My hands, which had trembled with pain, now moved with calculated precision. I canceled the financing for the luxury apartment in Manhattan that I had bought for him, a graduation gift he accepted as if it were his right. The contract was in my name, with him as the tenant, a precaution my lawyer had insisted on and which now proved prophetic. Next, the joint accounts. He had access to an account I maintained for emergencies, with a considerable sum representing years of my savings, the fruit of a lifetime of hard work. I transferred everything to an exclusive account in my name at a different bank, leaving no digital or bureaucratic traces he could easily track. It wasn't theft, it was simply the withdrawal of my own money, which he, in his arrogance, considered his inalienable right. The investments I had made for his future, in tech stocks and pension funds, were liquidated. I had worked hard for every penny, giving up my own comfortable and secure retirement, and he would no longer have access to them. Each step was painful but necessary. I felt as if I was cutting an invisible umbilical cord, a bond I believed to be unbreakable, but which he had severed with his cruel words. Tears streamed silently as I typed passwords and confirmed transactions, but they weren't tears of regret. They were tears of grief for the mother I had been and for the son he refused to be. I was freeing myself from an illusion, and he from a dependency that prevented him from seeing reality. The day I decided to leave, I went to his apartment. He was at work as usual. The key I still had on my keychain seemed to weigh a ton in my hand. I entered, and the silence of that place, which once held laughter and plans, was now oppressive. I walked to his desk, a space he kept immaculate, filled with gadgets and expensive books. I took a deep breath, holding a small object in my hands. It wasn't a bomb, nor a curse letter. It was something much more subtle, much more personal, and infinitely more devastating to Mark's mind. I placed it carefully in the center of his desk, next to his state-of-the-art laptop. It was a silent reminder of what he was losing and what he had destroyed. In a few hours, when he returned home, that object would be the catalyst for his own ruin. I knew the pain he would feel would be immense, but I also knew it was the only way he might, one day, understand the true cost of his cruel words. My life, since I became a mother, had always revolved around Mark. I was only 26 when I found myself alone, with a baby in my arms and an uncertain future ahead on the bustling streets of Chicago. Mark's father, a man named David, decided that family life wasn't for him and disappeared without looking back, leaving me to raise our son alone. But I didn't give up. On the contrary, adversity gave me a strength I didn't know I possessed. I worked tirelessly, often at 2 jobs, as a waitress in a traditional diner in Brooklyn during the day and cleaning offices in the financial heart of the city at night, to ensure Mark never lacked for anything. He always had the best clothes, the toys he wanted, and the extra math and science classes that would help him excel in the neighborhood public school, the same one I had attended. I remember when he was 10 and dreamed of being an astronaut. I spent months saving every penny, giving up small luxuries and even some meals to take him to the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Seeing the sparkle in his eyes as he touched a piece of moon rock, imagining himself among the stars, was worth every hour of overtime, every lost night of sleep. That trip was a milestone, a symbol of my unwavering commitment to his dreams. When it was time for college, he chose mechanical engineering at New York University, NYU, one of the most prestigious and expensive in the country. I didn't hesitate. I took out loans, worked even harder, and went into debt for years so he could have the degree I, due to lack of opportunities, never had. "Mom, you're the best," he would say, hugging me tightly at graduation in his cap and gown. "Everything I am, I owe to you. You're my hero." Those words were my greatest treasure, proof that all my effort and sacrifice would be worth it. After college, Mark got a good job at a tech company in San Francisco. I helped him find an apartment, paid the deposit, and we even furnished it together, choosing each piece with care, imagining his future there. I wanted him to have a comfortable start in life, without the difficulties and deprivations I faced. He was always my pride, my life's project, an extension of my own being. I saw him as a reflection of my love and dedication, the materialization of all my dreams. But at some point, something changed. Gradually, calls became less frequent. Sunday lunches, which were sacred to us, were replaced by important commitments, with colleagues or with his new girlfriend, Sarah. Affection gave way to a cold distance, a silence that deeply bothered me. I wondered where I had gone wrong. Was I too overprotective? Did I hand him everything on a silver platter without teaching him the value of effort and gratitude? Or was it the influence of Sarah, an ambitious young woman in her early 30s, who seemed to view life only through financial and social status lenses? She was never overtly rude, but her glances, her subtle comments about independence and freedom, always made me uncomfortable, as if I were an impediment to their success. I tried to ignore it, believing that a child's love was unshakable, that gratitude would prevail. But Mark's words that night, "Your death would be the perfect gift," brutally and irreversibly shattered that illusion. He didn't see me as his mother, the woman who raised him and loved him more than life itself, but as an obstacle, a burden, a relic of a past he wanted to erase. And that realization, more than anything else, spurred me to act. I needed to show him the true value of what he was despising, the pain of those words. "Your death would be the perfect gift," kept me awake for nights on end. But along with the excruciating pain, a cold, relentless clarity began to settle in my mind. I could not allow my son to treat me with such contempt, nor could I allow him to continue benefiting from a relationship he himself had declared dead. If he desired my absence, I would give him complete absence, not just emotionally, but financially as well. My decision was made with a firmness I didn't know I still possessed. he would learn the value of what he had by losing it irremediably. I started with the apartment in Manhattan, a luxurious 2-bedroom property overlooking Central Park, which I had largely financed and which was in my name, with him as the tenant. A call to the bank, a concise explanation about unexpected family changes, and the financing was canceled. The bank, following the terms of the contract, would initiate the repossession process. Next, the joint accounts. He had access to an account I maintained for emergencies, with a considerable sum representing years of my savings, the fruit of a lifetime of hard work. I transferred everything to an exclusive account in my name at a different bank, leaving no digital or bureaucratic traces he could easily track. It wasn't theft. It was simply the withdrawal of my own money, which he, in his arrogance, considered his inalienable right. The investments I had made for his future in tech stocks and pension funds were liquidated. I had worked hard for every penny, giving up my own comfortable and secure retirement, and he would no longer have access to them. Each step was painful but necessary. I felt as if I was cutting an invisible umbilical cord, a bond I believed to be unbreakable, but which he had severed with his cruel words. Tears streamed silently as I typed passwords and confirmed transactions, but they weren't tears of regret or weakness. They were tears of grief for the mother I had been, for the life I had dedicated, and for the son he refused to be. I was freeing myself from an illusion, from an emotional and financial burden, and he, from a dependency that prevented him from seeing reality and from valuing those who truly loved him. With each click, each confirmation, I felt a weight being lifted from my shoulders, replaced by a sense of empowerment, that I was finally regaining control of my own life. The day I decided to leave, I went to his apartment. He was at work, as usual, probably in some important meeting, oblivious to the storm brewing. The key I still had on my keychain, a reminder of happier times, seemed to weigh a ton in my hand. I entered, and the silence of that place, which once held laughter, plans, and shared dreams, was now oppressive, laden with painful memories. I walked to his desk, a space he kept immaculate, filled with state-of-the-art gadgets like a smartwatch and wireless headphones, and expensive books on finance and entrepreneurship, all symbols of his ambition. I took a deep breath, holding a small object in my hands. It wasn't a bomb, nor a curse letter, nor a bounced check. It was something much more subtle, much more personal, and infinitely more devastating to Mark's mind, something that would strike at his vanity and his sense of control. I placed it carefully in the center of his desk, next to his state-of-the-art laptop and a framed photo of him with Sarah, smiling, as if the world were theirs. It was a silent reminder of what he was losing and what he had destroyed. In a few hours, when he returned home, that object would be the catalyst for his own ruin. I knew the pain he would feel would be immense, but I also knew it was the only way he might, one day, understand the true cost of his cruel words and the ingratitude he had cultivated in his heart. The object I left on Mark's desk was not a goodbye letter nor a veiled threat. It was something much simpler, yet loaded with devastating symbolism for him. A small porcelain figurine, a smiling snowman he had given me when he was 5. I remember that day perfectly. We were in Central Park, it was lightly snowing, and he, with his red gloves and wool hat, handed me the snowman he had won from a prize machine. "For you, Mommy," he said, his eyes sparkling. "So you remember me when I'm an astronaut and far away." That snowman, which I had cherished for decades, was now there, in the center of his immaculate desk, a ghost of the past, a silent reminder of a love he had discarded. When Mark arrived home that night, the luxury apartment in Manhattan, which I had helped finance, was silent. He tossed his briefcase on the sofa, loosened his tie, and walked to the kitchen, probably to get a drink. It was then that his eyes landed on the desk. The snowman. He picked it up, confused, and a wrinkle of bewilderment formed on his forehead. There was no note, no explanation. Just the snowman, a remnant of a childhood he seemed to have forgotten. At first, he probably thought it was just a visit from me, a melancholic, motherly gesture. But the absence of any other message, the quietness of the house, sent a shiver down his spine. It was then that he decided to check his bank statement online. The laptop screen glowed, revealing the joint account balance, 0. The shock was immediate. He tried to access his investment account, his savings, all the financial sources he considered his by right, all empty or with negligible balances. Panic began to set in. He tried to call the bank, his manager, but it was too late. No one answered. Then came the call from the apartment owner, informing him that the financing had been canceled and he would have to vacate the property in 30 days. The owner's voice was cold and formal, leaving no room for negotiation. Mark's world, built on a foundation of financial security he believed to be unshakable, began to crumble in a matter of minutes. He tried to call me, but my number was blocked. Text messages weren't delivered. I had disappeared, taking with me not only the money, but also the illusion that he could have everything without effort. The snowman, once a symbol of love, was now a harbinger of his own solitude. Mark's panic escalated rapidly. At first, he tried to remain calm, convinced that it was all just a misunderstanding, a mother's tantrum that would soon pass. He called Sarah, his girlfriend, his voice strained. "Honey, Mom did something crazy. She canceled the apartment financing and emptied the accounts. It must be some kind of emotional blackmail." Sarah, who had always been pragmatic and focused on financial security, listened with a mix of disbelief and concern. "Mark, are you sure? Your mom wouldn't do something like that." But her voice already carried a hint of doubt, a seed of distrust he didn't notice at the time. He spent the night wide awake, desperately trying to reverse the situation. He called lawyers, financial advisors, influential friends, but the answer was always the same. The financing was in her name, Mark. As for the joint accounts, she had the right to withdraw the money. There's nothing we can do legally. Reality hit him like a punch to the gut. He was without an apartment, without money, and with an uncertain future ahead. The tech company in San Francisco, where he worked, paid well, but his salary barely covered the luxurious lifestyle he led, and the bonuses he expected for the end of the year had been invested in a risky project that now seemed like a mirage. Sarah, who was accustomed to expensive dinners at trendy Manhattan restaurants and weekend trips to the Hamptons, began to show her impatience. "Mark, what are we going to do? I can't live on the streets with you." Her words, once full of affection, now sounded cold and calculating. He tried to reassure her, promising he would fix everything, that his mother would come to her senses. But with each passing day, the situation worsened. The moving company called to schedule the removal of his belongings from the apartment. Credit card bills started arriving with exorbitant interest rates he couldn't pay. The luxury car he drove, a gift from me, was also in my name and was repossessed. He was losing everything, and with each loss, the image of the snowman on his desk returned to his mind, a constant reminder of his ingratitude. The world he had built, based on privilege and my generosity, was crumbling before his eyes, and he had nowhere to run. Sarah's patience quickly ran out. Accustomed to a life of luxury and financial stability, she was unwilling to share Mark's uncertainty and ruin. With each passing day, her words became more acidic, her glances colder. "Mark, you need to sort this out with your mother. I can't live like this. I didn't marry a man who has nowhere to live and is broke." The mask of love and support she wore began to fall, revealing a pragmatic and self-serving woman whose affection was directly tied to the status and wealth Mark represented. The final confrontation took place in a small downtown cafe, a modest place Mark had chosen because he no longer had money for the sophisticated restaurants they frequented. He tried to explain the situation, pleading for her understanding and support. "Sarah, I promise I'll fix this. My mom will give in, she always does." But Sarah interrupted him with a bitter laugh. "Give in? Mark, your mom taught you a lesson, and you, like an idiot, fell into her trap. I'm not going to be the woman who supports you while you try to rebuild your life. I have my own dreams, my own goals. Her words were an even harder blow than mine. He realized with searing pain that Sarah had never truly loved him, but rather the lifestyle he could provide, the status that came with his last name, and the financial security that I, his mother, had built. "Are you leaving me?" he asked, his voice choked. "I'm not leaving you, Mark. I'm just choosing my own future. And it doesn't include a man who has nowhere to go and has been disinherited by his own mother." She stood up, tossed her napkin on the table, and walked away without looking back, leaving him alone amidst the remnants of his cold coffee and his crumbling life. Mark found himself completely isolated. His friends, who once surrounded him seeking favors and opportunities, vanished. His colleagues, who admired him for his ambition and success, now looked at him with pity and distrust. He tried calling some of them, but the excuses were always the same. "I'm busy. I can't talk right now. You'd better solve your problems alone." The phone, once a symbol of his popularity, was now a constant reminder of his loneliness. He had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. The apartment was being emptied, his belongings packed in boxes ready to be taken to a storage unit. He was homeless, penniless, without a girlfriend, and without friends. The snowman, which he had left on the apartment table, was now a symbol of his own fragility, his inability to sustain himself without the support of the mother he had despised. Mark's suffering was just beginning, and the lesson he needed to learn would be the most painful of his life. Mark was in freefall. The initial euphoria of freedom quickly turned into chilling despair. Without the luxury apartment, he found himself sleeping in his car for a few nights, a rented sedan he would soon have to return. The snowman, which he had taken with him in a moment of confusion, lay on the passenger seat, a silent witness to his downfall. Each time his eyes fell on the small object, a pang of guilt and incomprehension struck him. How could his mother, the woman who had always supported him unconditionally, do this? He tried to stay in a cheap motel, but the money he had on hand quickly evaporated. The life he knew of expensive dinners, designer clothes, and last-minute trips was a distant mirage. His credit cards, once unlimited, were now rejected everywhere. The tech company, which once seemed like a springboard to success, now proved indifferent to his personal problems. His performance plummeted, and conversations with his manager became increasingly tense. He was on the verge of losing the job he valued so much. The loneliness was overwhelming. Sarah had completely disappeared, blocking him on all social media and changing her phone number. The friends he had cultivated so carefully, those who frequented his dinners and parties, vanished like smoke. No one answered his calls. No one replied to his messages. He was a ghost in his own life. It was then that, in a moment of desperation, he found himself in a homeless shelter in Lower Manhattan, a place he never imagined he would set foot in. The raw, unforgiving reality of life without privilege hit him with full force. As he observed the people around him, each with their own story of loss and struggle, Mark began to see himself from a new perspective. The arrogance, the ingratitude, the cruel words he had uttered against his mother all came to light with painful clarity. The snowman, which he still carried with him, was no longer a symbol of a blackmailing mother, but a reminder of the unconditional love he had despised. He remembered the nights Reagan worked late, the mended clothes she wore so he could have the best, the silent sacrifices she made every day. The lesson was brutal, but necessary. He had lost everything he considered important, and now, at rock bottom, he finally began to understand the true value of what he had thrown away. With trembling hands, he picked up a payphone and dialed the only number left in his memory, his mother's. The phone rang 3 times before I answered. The voice on the other end was unrecognizable, choked, broken. "Mom, it's Mark." My heart, which I had hardened to endure the pain, skipped a beat. I had been expecting this call, but I didn't know how I would react. "Mark," I replied, keeping my voice firm, but with an almost imperceptible tremor. "What do you want?" He hesitated, and I could hear his suppressed sobs on the other end of the line. Mom, I'm so sorry. For everything. For my words, for my ingratitude. I didn't know what I was saying. I didn't offer immediate comfort. The pain he had caused me was too deep to be erased by a simple apology. You wished for my death, Mark. You humiliated me, made me feel like a burden. My voice faltered a little, but I composed myself. You can't just erase that, he continued, with a sincerity I had never heard before. I know, Mom. I know what I said was unforgivable, but I lost everything. Sarah left me. I lost the apartment, the car, my friends. I'm in a shelter, Mom. I have nothing. The mention of the shelter struck me. As much as I wanted him to learn a lesson, the thought of my son in such a situation caused me searing pain. What do you want from me, Mark? I asked, trying to maintain my composure. I don't want your money, Mom. I don't want your apartment. I just want your forgiveness. I want my mom back. Silence stretched for a few seconds. I could feel the sincerity in his voice, the genuine humiliation. It was the first time in years that he hadn't spoken with arrogance or demand. Meet me tomorrow at 10 in the morning in Bryant Park, I said finally, on the bench near the Goda statue, and bring the snowman. He agreed immediately, without question. The next day, I was there, punctually, watching people pass by. When Mark appeared, I barely recognized him. He was thin, with wrinkled clothes and sunken eyes, but there was something different in his gaze. Humility. He held the snowman in his hands like a treasure. He sat beside me, and the silence between us was heavy, but different. It wasn't the silence of contempt, but of regret. Mom, I understand, he said finally. I understand what you did. It wasn't revenge. It was a lesson, and I needed it. He handed me the snowman. I kept this. It's the only thing I have left that truly matters. I took the snowman, feeling the warmth of his hands. I'm not going to give you money, Mark. I'm not going to give you an apartment. You're going to have to rebuild your life from scratch, with your own effort. He nodded, tears in his eyes. I know, Mom, and I'm ready for it, but I need a chance to prove I've changed, a chance to have my mom back. I looked at him, at the man he was becoming, and saw a glimpse of the boy I had raised. Justice had been served, not with destruction, but with the opportunity for redemption. 5 years have passed since that meeting in Bryant Park. Mark didn't return to the luxury of Manhattan, nor to the life of privilege I had provided. He started from scratch, working in a small coffee shop in Queens, washing dishes and waiting tables. It was a shock for him, but he persevered. Every day he learned the value of hard work, of money earned with sweat, of the dignity that comes from self-effort. He saved every penny, rented a small room, and little by little rebuilt his life.